Good morning, everyone. Got a couple of people still straggling in. Only got one person who thinks they found the moose in this image. Anybody else find the moose? This is a photo from a moose survey in Katmai in Alaska. And the moose is right here. Can you imagine having a job where you try and look at pictures and find how many moose there are? All right. So we'll start as always. Hang on, let me erase that. With announcements. These are basically the same as yesterday. Nothing has changed. I mean, Monday, nothing has changed since Monday. I've seen a lot of people have been doing the intro survey. That's great. It is due before midnight on Sunday. And there's a homework assignment on Canvas that's also due before midnight on Sunday. The next things coming up are the project proposal, which is due the end of this month, and exam one, which is February 7th. Does anybody have any questions about the project or anything else that we've gone over so far?
So the project is going to be like a science experiment.
Could you repeat that?
The project is going to be like a science experiment.
It's going to be a more like a literature search rather than an actual experiment. So you'll do some research on a topic related to biology and gather up all the information you can find and then report on it. And the report can be, I'm really wide open about what you can do for the report. Presentations, there's a paper option. I've had students do graphic comics, TikTok videos, original songs. Just ask me if you've come up with some other way to present information, and chances are good I'll approve it.
Sounds good.
Okay. Anyone else? All right. So when we met on Monday, we kind of talked about a little bit about science and how science is done. I want to spend a little bit more time talking about that. You know, biology is the scientific study of life. And we talked about what is science and what it's not. But I wanted to add a couple of really important points. First off is that science is a self-correcting system, which is trying to explain the objective reality of the natural world, not what we perceive so much as what is actually going on. So in science, you might not say this is blue, you would give how many nanometers the color wavelength is that you're looking at. Science has to be measurable, and it must be reproducible by other scientists. It is also able to predict future events. So we can look at scientific theories and get an idea of what's going to happen in the future. Science does not have value judgments. It doesn't say something is good or bad. It's just the way it is. And it only applies to things that are measurable. We don't use science to talk about emotions. There's not a way to objectively measure somebody's emotions. We don't use science to talk about whether something is attractive or not, whether that art is good. That's not scientific. So we're really trying to get objective facts. And biology is the science of life. And for those of you who've already done the intro survey, you see the question, what is life? And I always love asking that question at the beginning of a semester because you get lots of non-scientific answers. So this shows that there are lots of different ways to interpret that question. But when we talk about science and biology, we're kind of going to get a definition of life with specific criteria. Now, every biology textbook or website or biologist that you ask, is going to have a slightly different definition. It's probably going to contain some or all of these characteristics. And I'm going to go through the details of these one at a time as we go through this lecture. So, responding to the environment, reproducing, your offspring have some of your genetic material, evolving as a species, growing and developing, homeostasis. I bet that's not a word you're familiar with. Metabolism and organization. Every part of your body is organized. So these are kind of the descriptive characteristics of life. And you can use these as a checklist to determine if something is alive or not. When we start talking about cells, we'll also talk about cell theory. And cell theory has a much simpler definition of life. Cell theory states that life is anything that consists of one or more cells. So that's a different and simpler definition of life. But these are the characteristics that we expect from life. And we're going to go through those. Okay. We're going to start with response to stimuli, or stimulus, if you like the singular. All living things are going to react to their environment or to changes in their environment. Plants grow in the direction of sunlight. When you look outside, most of the time plants seem to be growing up, but occasionally you'll find a tree that's kind of growing at an angle because it's shaded by other trees. When we think about animals, we can think about movement. Animals will move towards food and away from danger. Even small things like bacteria will respond to stimuli, and they will try and, for example, run away from your immune system cells. So that's the first one. The second characteristic of life is reproduction and heredity. So anything that is living is going to make more individuals of their species. And their offspring are going to be similar to themselves. So on a grand scheme, dogs give birth to puppies, not oak trees. But the heredity part says that a Labrador is going to give birth to at least Labrador hybrids or Labrador puppies, depending on who the other parent is, and not, for example, French bulldogs. So heredity says the offspring are going to be very similar to the adult. And all organisms have genetic material. For most of us, that is in the form of DNA. So DNA is the material of heredity. And it contains the instructions for making a new organism and instructions for how an organism functions. And all species on the species level adapt. So we talked about response to stimuli, but at the species level, a species is going to react by adapting to changes in the environment. This is evolution. So this graphic shows the evolutionary history of whales. If you didn't know, whales started out as some odd little land animal, became semi-aquatic, and gradually became more and more adapted to a life in the ocean. They responded to changes in the environment. Their environment became wetter. They started becoming more adapted to being in the water. All species have modifications that improve survival and reproduction. So for the whales in the water, developing flippers and a lot of body mass for living in the deep, cold ocean, those are important adaptations. If we think of polar bears, we know they're in a lot of trouble because they are highly adapted to extremely cold temperatures and for using seals as a food source. So when we think about evolution, it is a change in species, not in individuals, over many generations. So there will be a small change in the next generation, And then the generation after that will have another change, and so on and so forth until you see a big change. So what is a species? You guys familiar with, I'm sure you've heard the term before, but does anybody have an idea of how we can define species?
A species would be like pretty much anything in a sort of, I'm trying to find the best way to describe this, like a similar-ish umbrella, kind of. So like a dog and a coyote, or a dog and a wolf, are going to be in the same species.
I think the way we decide is if they'll mate with each other.
Okay. Mate with each other is definitely an important part of it, but it is not the only part.
Mm-hmm.
Horses and donkeys can mate with each other. Their offspring is a mule. So I'm going to add offspring must be fertile. They must be able to reproduce. And I'm going to go back to the similarities, because that is the other kind of half of this description. Similar physical, behavioral characteristics or traits. So yes, dogs and wolves are technically the same species, even though there's a lot of difference in their appearance. But they do have very similar physical characteristics. They have some similar behavioral characteristics, and they can mate and produce fertile offspring. So that's kind of where we define species. Oops. And those changes that occur within a species occur because of mutations in DNA. A mutation, what is a mutation? Anybody have an idea? Nope. Okay, good. That's fine. A mutation is any change in the DNA. When we start talking about genetics and we start talking about DNA, we can be more specific about this. But for now, a mutation is any change in your DNA. If a mutation is harmful, the individual is less likely to survive and reproduce. If the mutation is beneficial, the individual is more likely to survive and reproduce. And in that case, they pass that mutation on to offspring. And their offspring are now going to be also more likely to survive and reproduce because they have that beneficial mutation. Is everybody clear on all this?
Yep.
Okay, good, thanks. One last thing I want to say here. This is a quote from Theodosius Dobzhansky. Ooh, man, I have no idea how to pronounce that name. I'm going to type it up here for you guys. Interested? So as we are going through this semester and learning more and more about biology, keep evolution kind of in the back of your mind. And you'll see that there's a lot in biology that would not make sense if we didn't understand at least some about evolution. The next thing we're going to talk about is growth and development. I'm pretty sure you guys can figure out what growth means. When we look at multicellular organisms, we start out small and we grow more and more cells until we become larger. Even bacteria grow over time. They start out smaller. Even though they're a single cell, they don't get new cells, but they do become physically bigger. When organisms grow, we tend to think about humans and dogs and cats. So for a lot of mammals, growth is only occurring in part of the life cycle. So while before we're born and while we're children and teenagers, we are experiencing growth. But for other organisms, like plants and fish and several other things, growth is continual. So a plant will keep growing throughout its entire life. It doesn't grow at the same speed. So the fastest growth is when they're young, but a 100-year-old oak tree is still getting a little bit bigger. It's just not doing it very quickly. Now the other part, development. This has a very specific meaning in biology. These are the changes that happen between fertilization of an egg and that fertilized egg becoming a reproductive adult. When we think about plants, you can start with a seed, which is a fertilized egg. It grows. Sometimes the early stages do not look like the adult stages. Eventually it grows up and develops flowers, and that's a reproductive adult. Insects start out as eggs. They have larval stage, and then a pupal stage, and then an adult stage. And even humans go through development. We start out as a fertilized egg. We don't start out looking like a person. We start out with tails, for example, and there's a lot of changes that have to happen before we get to birth. And even after birth, there are still developmental changes that go on until reproductive adulthood. So that's what growth and development mean. Anybody have questions on that one?
I'm good.
Good, thank you. Okay, here's one that I doubt you've heard of. Has anybody heard of homeostasis?
Homeostasis is effectively the equilibrium in which an organism, pretty much of any kind, is at its most stable, which for a human being includes, obviously, like you see here, certain levels of blood glucose and stuff like that. Obviously having the right pH balance, so drinking enough water, the proper alkalinity of the water, eating enough food, even exercising and stuff like that helps us to maintain homeostasis.
Okay, that was awesome. I am impressed. Usually nobody has heard of this. Hi, Lola's dog. Yes, homeostasis is an equilibrium. It is maintaining relatively constant internal conditions. You can also say stable. So yes, this comes from homeo, which is Greek for like, and stasis, which basically means the same or steady. And it is things like temperature, hydration, salt levels, pH, blood sugar. There's a whole bunch of things that we maintain at a relatively constant level because those are the optimal conditions for our survival, our growth, and our reproduction. Now, I say relatively stable, and equilibrium is a good term for this because it's not like we keep our body temperature constantly at 98.6. Sometimes during the day, our body temperature might go down to 97, 96. It might go up to 99. It doesn't just stay at one level. Blood glucose or blood sugar is a really great thing to look at when we talk about this. So ideal blood glucose is around 90 milligrams per deciliter. And so we're looking at blood glucose levels on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. A is when you get up and you eat breakfast. Your blood sugar is going to go up. And if you got a blood glucose test at this point in your day, it's going to look like you have high blood sugar, which is a sign of diabetes. But what happens is there is a control system that triggers the production of insulin when your blood sugar gets too high. And that causes cells to take up the blood sugar to reduce the amount of sugar in the blood. And then your blood sugar gets a little bit too low. So a different hormone is produced, glucagon, which causes cells to release sugar back into the bloodstream. And you kind of go up and down around this 90 milligram level all day. So you don't stay at this level. You just kind of go up and down, and the average is going to be 90. These are called feedback mechanisms. And we're usually completely unaware of these. Okay. All living things have metabolism. Do we have a definition for metabolism? Somebody new?
Sorry.
Don't apologize. We're still in that getting to know each other phase, and a lot of students don't like to speak up on Zoom, even if they would respond in the classroom. Okay, Jonathan, you want to give us a definition?
Metabolism is, at least from what I can remember, is effectively the rate at which energy is, it's at the It's the rate at which food is broken down and transformed into energy for the body to use.
Thank you for that. That is correct, but it is incomplete, which is something I expect from students at this level, because it's not just transformation of food into energy. It is also formation of materials needed by the body. So a better definition, an umbrella definition of metabolism, is all of the chemical reactions of a cell or body. So yes, it is breaking down food for energy, but it's also taking components of that food and making new things out of it. So if you eat food that's got a lot of protein, some of that, first off, it's going to be broken down into amino acids. Some of it will be used for energy, but some of those amino acids are going to be used to make proteins that your body needs, things like muscles. Carbohydrates can be used for energy, but it can also be used to make new and different carbohydrates that are important for things like the ability of your immune system to recognize your cells. Fats in the diet, again, energy synthesis, but we also make certain hormones from the breakdown products of fats. So it involves both energy and materials. Now, what is energy? We've got all these terms that we use all the time that we often don't think about a definition for. Energy is the ability to do work, and work, when we're talking science, is anything that gets done. So walking across the classroom, picking your dog up. I'm sorry, Lola, I like your dog. But it's also blood moving through your body and all kinds of different things. Most organisms get energy either directly or indirectly from the sun. So plants get it directly from the sun. They can take sunlight and convert it into carbohydrates. We get our energy from the sun indirectly by eating things. We eat plants or we eat animals that have eaten plants. There are some organisms that can use other food sources, but they're generally small organisms and often deep in the ocean or underground. Okay, so those are most of the characteristics of life. We're going to spend a little more time on the next one, which is organization. Are there any questions on this part? Comments, thoughts?
I'm good.
This may be stuff that you guys have seen before. If not, now's the time to ask questions, or we'll go on. Okay. So this is kind of a busy slide. I apologize for that. But we're going to walk through this together. Living things are all organized. We have organization, but we have organization at all of these different levels. We're going to start our discussion of this at the cell. The cell is the basic unit of life. I mentioned this earlier. All living things we're introducing these different levels, and we're actually going to kind of be using these as the organization system for the class. So we're going to start at the smaller levels and work our way through all of these different levels. I've been using the term cell. I haven't defined it yet. Does anybody want to chime in with a definition of cell?
A cell is effectively a collection of like molecules, and even in some cases, like on our own cells, organelles to serve a specific purpose.
Okay. Yep. A collection of molecules. I'm going to say including genetic material. There's a small caveat there, but we're just going to stick with the simple part right now. I'm going to also add wrapped in a membrane. So there is an outer layer that holds all of those molecules together. But if we want to start, let's start at the subcellular level. So here's the cell right at this level. And below that, we have the chemistry of the cell. Atoms, molecules, and macromolecules. So atoms are the fundamental unit of matter. So everything that exists is made of atoms, ignoring things that are smaller than atoms. Anything that you can see, touch, smell, taste, the air that we breathe, it's all made of atoms. Molecules are two or more atoms that are connected in some way. And there are lots of different ways atoms can be connected to make molecules. And macromolecules, macro means large. So the name tells you exactly what it is. These are large molecules. Things like proteins, DNA, carbohydrates, and lipids, also known as fats. Okay, so that's the lowest few levels. But then cells make up tissues. Tissues are a group of similar cells that work together. So your skin is a type of, well, it contains epithelial tissues and a few other types of tissues. I did not do organelles. Ah, it's not on the slide, it's in my notes. All right, I'm going to back up a second. Inside the cell. The term organelles was used earlier when we were talking about what a cell is. These are found pretty much only in a type of cell called a eukaryotic cell. Eukaryotic cells are cells that have a nucleus. That is our basic definition of a eukaryotic cell. EU in scientific terms means true, and karyo refers to the DNA. Well, that's close enough for right now. The organelles in eukaryotic cells are structures that have a common purpose. We can think of them as the organs of the cell. So the purposes can be things like breaking down material or manufacturing material, producing energy, defense, defending the cell against invading bacteria. We even have a skeletal system in our cells. Those are the eukaryotic cells. Oops, did not mean to do that, sorry. Now, there is another kind of cell. I'm gonna have to get rid of some of this stuff. Called a prokaryotic cell, and these do not have a nucleus. So their DNA is not contained in a membrane-bound area. So the nucleus, just like the cell, is membrane-bound. Prokaryotic cells tend to be smaller, simpler, and the organisms that have those tend to be single-celled. They don't form complex multicellular organisms. Okay, let me just check my notes and make sure that we're caught up. Okay. All right. Now we can go on above the cell. Cells make up tissues. I defined those a second ago. Tissues work together to make organs. So, you know, in our bodies, we have organs like, the example here is the stomach, but it's, you know, the heart, the liver, the stomach, kidneys. And these all have specialized functions. But then the organs work together in organ systems. So the cardiovascular system consists of the heart, lungs, blood vessels, all working together, and the blood. And of course, organ systems work together to form an organism, an individual living thing. But it doesn't end there. Organisms can also be organized into higher levels. These are the kinds of levels that are studied by scientists called ecologists. And we can have a population, all living organisms of the same species in a common area. So when we think about people, there's a population of people who live in Ventura. There's a population of people who live in California. There's a population of people who live in the United States. You can have populations at a bunch of different levels. Community is all populations in a common area. So if we're talking about Ventura, the community in Ventura includes the people, all of the plants, the seagulls, the sea lions in the harbor, dogs and cats, everything that lives in a common area. We often think about that as the ecosystem, but the ecosystem is the community plus abiotic components in the area. Anybody know what abiotic means?
Abiotic means without life.
Exactly. Anytime you see a scientific word beginning with a or an, that means without. Bio is life. So abiotic is literally non-living. So an ecosystem is also going to include water and soil and oxygen in the air. And then, of course, all ecosystems on Earth make up the biosphere. All right, how are we doing?
I'm doing good.
Glad to hear that. I don't know about you, but I can't wait to get back in the classroom. All right, so that kind of wraps up the characteristics of living things. And now we're going to talk about organizing the diversity of life, organizing all of the living things. And how we organize living things is taxonomy. So you can see taxonomic here, and then I wrote in taxonomy. And taxonomy is a way of explaining how species are related to each other. This originally started by looking at physical characteristics. We can look at a coyote and a fox and a wolf and get a good idea that those are related. They look similar. Nowadays, we use not just physical characteristics, but we also include genetics, because the genetics will really tell you about the evolutionary relationship between species. And the goal here is creating family trees that indicate the relationships there. The levels of taxonomic organization. These are, let's just go with species. We talked about what a species is. Species that are closely related to each other will be in the same genus. Organisms in different genii, who are closely related will be in the same family. Families closely related will be in the same order, orders in a class, class in a phylum, phylum in kingdoms, and then kingdoms in domains. So domains are the largest category. It's a very broad categories. We'll give you some examples of this, but I do want to give you this mnemonic to remember these levels. Drunken kangaroos punch children on family game shows. It's stupid. The stupid ones are the ones that you will always remember. Now, when we go through this class and we talk about these different levels, we're mostly going to be focusing on the upper and lower ends of this. So we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about classes, orders, and families, but we are going to talk about genus and species and domains, kingdoms, and phylums. All right. So let's walk through the taxonomic description of gray wolves. So first off, wolves are in the kingdom Animalia, all animals. Basically, if you're looking at something multicellular that is capable of moving under its own power, it's going to be an animal. And a lot of people will put all the mammals together and say, yeah, those are animals. But we also need to include insects, lobsters, spiders, jellyfish, birds. These are all mammals. So it's this entire group. And then we can divide animals up into invertebrates and vertebrates. Let me write those words for you. Vertebrates are the phylum Chordata. And it means that we have a spinal cord going down our back. So we've got this, the vertebrate bones in our back and a nerve cord back there. Invertebrates, no bones. They basically don't have bones. Then we get to Mammalia, which is more carefully defined and excludes birds and reptiles and fish and sharks. Then we want to be specific to the carnivores. Carnivores include the various dogs, bears, sea lions, cats, the family, the canid family, all of the dogs. If we exclude the foxes, which are least related to the other dogs, we can get to the genus Canis, and then the species wolf is Lupus. When see if this will let me. I don't think this will let me be fancy here. When we write out the scientific name for an organism, we just write out the genus and the species. The genus is capitalized. The species starts with a lowercase letter, and it should be in italics. Zoom won't let me do italics that I can figure out. If you're handwriting it, or like in this case, Zoom won't let you, you can underline it. I did not mean for that to be that big. Okay. So carnivores, usually meat eaters, they have specific teeth structures. Canid carnivores with specialized skull structures, certain types of scent glands. We kind of define them by these things. And then Canis lupus is a wolf. It has a large size, a deep rib cage, very heavily muscled neck, relatively small ears, and very heavy, powerful teeth. They have a great deal of bite force. When we write out the name as the genus and the species, we call that binomial nomenclature. Bi means two, nom refers to name. We see nom again in the second part, clature, system. Two name naming system. A little bit redundant there. Well, let's talk about wolves. There are different kinds of wolves. So we can have subspecies. We can have Canis lupus. Lupus, which is a European wolf. Canis lupus albus, which is the tundra wolf. There's a red wolf. And of course, there's the domestic dog, which is technically a subspecies of the wolf. Okay. Here's another example. Humans. We are in the domain. I know we didn't talk about a domain for wolves. We are in the domain eukarya. We just talked about eukaryotic cells. So eukarya refers to any organism that has a eukaryotic cell. We are animals. We are chordates, which means we have a backbone. We are mammals, warm-blooded, fur, produce milk. We are primates in the family Hominidae, genus Homo, species sapiens. So that would be us. And in fact, a lot of times you will see Homo sapiens sapiens. Depending on who you're talking to, there used to be other species of Homo sapiens, like the Neanderthal. Some people put us in the same species, some people make it different species. It's hard to figure out the line between species and subspecies sometimes. Now, why the hell do we go through this complicated, sorry, I cussed. I hope nobody had their kids in the room. Why do we go through such a complex naming system? Why don't we just use English or Spanish names for something? Well, these two birds are both called robins. The one on the left, that's probably familiar. That's the one we have in the United States, Turdus migratorius. The one on the right is a European species, Erythicus rubecula. Common names don't always refer to the same species. The scientific names will always refer to the same species. If you're in Europe and you're talking about robins, they're going to think you're talking about the guy on the right. If you're in Europe and you talk about Turdus migratorius, they know that you're talking about the American robin. And of course, common names can vary by location. Different places can have different names for the same species, but the scientific name is going to be the same everywhere. All right. I want to wrap up this part by talking about the domains. So there are 3 domains to life. Everything living on the planet Earth fits into one of these 3 categories. And these are defined by characteristics of the cell. So the easy one, of course, is eukarya. Cells have that membrane-bound nucleus, and they have organelles. Now, all of these things over here on this end are in the domain eukarya. That includes animals, fungi, plants, and a whole bunch of stuff you've probably never heard of that are mostly microscopic. We also have bacteria, which are prokaryotic and have few or no organelles. And that's these guys. I meant to do that in red, sorry. And then everybody else is in the group called archaea. Archaea are also prokaryotes. They have prokaryotic cells, but genetically and biochemically, they are different from bacteria, quite a bit different than bacteria. It's not something that a lot of people outside of science have heard about. Genetically and biochemically, I'm running out of space. They are more closely related to us than to bacteria, even though they're lacking that nucleus. Let me erase that. It's still hard to read. That's hard to read. Okay, so those are the 3 domains. How are we doing here?
Doing great.
Good. Okay. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about today is kind of you can put your pens down. This is not going to be on any quiz or anything. I wanted to talk a little bit about scientific careers. So you're taking biology. You may or may not be interested in science. You may have an idea of what you want to do with your life already. But let's talk about options. Observational science is things like studying ecosystems, studying a group of organisms. So if you like birds, you can study ornithology. You like insects, you can study entomology. Observational science also includes behavioral observations, looking at the behavior of animals, and epidemiology, studying how diseases spread. These all tend to involve what we call field work, which can be out in the middle of Africa or Central America, or it can be in an urban environment. I know people who study feral dogs, for example. Over here on the left is Erin. I think her last name's McGee, but she's a well-known herpetologist. We can also do experimental science. Oh, and I'm losing people. I can hear those bells going. These are what most people think about: working in a lab, hypothesis-based science. And a lot of this is medical research or genetics, but it can even be agriculture research, helping to improve crop production. One of the things that I want to mention here, one of the reasons that I even brought this up, graduate school. If you want to go into a scientific career, you may need to go on past a bachelor's degree. If you're going into English, you're going to have to pay for grad school. If you're going into biochemistry and molecular biology, which is what my graduate degree is in, you don't have to pay for it. You don't have to pay tuition. And in fact, my graduate career was fully funded and I got paid to go to graduate school. It wasn't much, but I did get paid. So if you're thinking about science, if you like science, but you were worried about that kind of thing, I wanted to put that little bug in your ear. I'm always happy to talk about this with students who want to explore options. There are pros and cons to being a scientist. And, like I said, if you're interested in talking about it, reach out to me and I'll be glad to discuss that. Okay. That is the end of the lecture for today. Does anybody have any last minute questions?
I'm good.
Not at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, sounds like we're good. Then I will see everybody. Oh, next Monday, the 17th.
Isn't next Monday a holiday?
Is a holiday. Yes, exactly. So I won't see you guys until next Wednesday. Feel free to email me if you come up with any questions in the meantime.
I was going to ask about the homework.
Okay.
So we do part 1 and 2, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was based off of the lecture on Monday.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for class today.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Davis.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. I'm Davis.
Bye. Have a good day.
Bye.